My daughters and I are studying the life of Jane Austen and her book Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen was born in December of 1776. She had 6 brothers and 1 older sister, Cassandra, to whom she was very close to. 20 years later, she wrote First Impressions, later called Pride and Prejudice when it was published in 1811. But we were curious, what would it have been like when Jane was a child, and thereby her characters, the Bennet sisters, when they were little girls? So, my daughters and I have been working this past month trying to recreate clothes they might have worn during that time period, as well as learning all about them that we possibly can. Although mothers might have nursed their children to begin with, oftentimes a wet nurse was brought in, or their child was sent to be raised by a wet nurse in the village. This is something that happened to Jane Austen and her sister Cassandra, that their nephew, Edward Austen Lee, was just astonished at, and so glad that they didn't do that anymore during the Victorian times. Something else still very common and would continue to be common is that up until 5 years old, both girls and boys dressed alike. Both of them would wear some sort of white muslin gown. Oftentimes before they could really crawl, it was very long, easily changed, and then as they got older, it would shorten. Once they turned 5, boys were called breeched, and the girls were put into shorter length dresses, which would continue to actually lengthen again as they grew older. Looking at all these portraits, it makes me wonder if Marie Antoinette was not basing her chemise à la reine dress on a shepherdess, but rather on children's clothing. However, Marie Antoinette does get the credit of starting this fashion trend of the chemise à la reine all over Europe. Now it was time for us to make clothes based around the 1790s. During one of their weeks of 40% off all fabrics at Hobby Lobby, I snatched up a whole bolt of bleached muslin made in the USA. It is definitely not as fine of a weave as what they would have worn, but it was as close as my budget would allow. These are the patterns that I used not just for the chemises or shift, but also for some of the overdresses and the white dresses themselves. I used this one for both the chemise and the white muslin dress and overdress for my middle daughter. Then I used this pattern for my youngest 2 for their white dresses. And for my oldest 2 daughters and myself, we used this pattern to make our shifts or chemises, but just used the shorter sleeve version and made it much longer, about to our knees. And then we used this pattern to make our white muslin dresses. I realized, though, putting this pattern out, that the muslin fabric that I had bought was not wide enough, and so I kind of modified things and didn't do the extra side pattern that was in this for the over muslin dress for us older 3. So I've just omitted the side piece for the back and then just made the front and the back pieces a little bit wider, pretty much just to match whatever I had, as what they would do too. They tried not to waste any fabric if possible. And here's my daughter stitching together her sash. Though you could already buy ready-made pieces even during this era, still a lot of the sewing was done at home, and obviously not with a sewing machine, but by hand. No matter what year you lived in, children were still children and loved to play games. One of the games they played was called shuttlecock, which is much like our badminton today, one of my kids' favorite. And another game that the girls played was called Graces. We made our own by using beech saplings, making them as smooth as possible, and then an embroidery hoop. Go ahead. My girls ended up playing this game for over 2 hours, but they also made up other variations using just sticks and the embroidery hoop. Another game that they played with, of course, were dolls, dress up, theater, anything that would give them some life-size lessons. Of course, embroidery was also a huge thing for girls. They would have their samplers and constantly work on it. Here's my little Zoe trying to draw out what she wanted to embroider. These are the examples of what my girls made themselves. They drew all these illustrations and then they stitched them in with whatever stitches they had learned. Jane Austen's father made sure that all of his children could read and would read as much as they possibly could, and Jane loved to be in his library. The very first layer for everyone was the shift or chemise, usually made out of linen, though sometimes it could be made out of cotton, but linen was much better. This was your very basic underwear. Starting at age 5 or 6, even young girls would wear stays, which came before corsets. Stays were lightly boned and there for posture and support. Silk stockings are always worn. These would come up over the knee and then be tied by garters. Next for girls would come at least one petticoat, usually more depending how warm it was outside. Another layer for morning dress, extra modesty, or being more mature in age was the chemisette or chemisette with sleeves. In the morning especially, it was important to have long sleeves and be more covered. Finally came the overdress, or in this case, just the plain white muslin dress. With my girls, there are tucks in it that would be let down as they grow taller. At this time, the waistline was still natural, but it would continue to rise until the Empire silhouette during the Regency period. A morning dress such as this could have been worn over your petticoat or your main dress before you got officially dressed for the day. Don't forget your accessories, gloves, fan, and actually caps were worn a lot. Jane Austen prided herself in the way that she made caps and loved to wear them so that she didn't have to fully dress her own hair. For middle and upper class families, girls could help each other get dressed, but more likely they would have had a maid to help them dress for the day. After the stockings were put on and at least one petticoat, the overdress was put on using drawstrings at the neckline and at the waist to pull it closed. In Pride and Prejudice, Mrs. Bennet implores Jane Bennet to please put on her sash for Mr. Bingley when he comes. It was this accessory that would take your plain white muslin dress and turn it into something colorful, beautiful, or just something different. Is it bright? Twirl around. If they were just going down to get breakfast, often they would put their morning dress on before coming back to get fully dressed and have their hair dressed as well, so they would be more ready for the day.
The struggle of an everyday Victorian life.
It's not Victorian.
Regency?
Again, during the morning, the chemisette with longer sleeves was put on as well. The hairstyles during the 1790s was still a bit fluffy and a lot more curly, more than we know of our movies. Like in the left, it wasn't quite there yet, it was more towards the right. Hair could still have been powdered, although, of course, the taxes were being put on wigs and powders, and so people just started to wear their natural hair unless it was graying or the forbidden red color. Some still did wear wigs or hair pieces, some even cut their hair very short. Others, like Jane Austen, did like to use their caps. They would use tongs, some sort of heat item, to curl the hair, or use rags or paper to set them in curls. Now, how did they wash all of those layers of clothes? Well, they didn't often. Usually it was just once or twice a month. It was a very expensive thing, usually taken by a washerwoman who would either come to your house or you would take it to her, and it would take 2 to 4 days to wash all the clothes. They would boil it, scrub them with lye or ash until they were nice and bright and clean. Make sure you monogrammed your items, or they could be mixed up with other people's. These are just a few things that we learned about Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, and this whole Long Regency era. We are hoping to give you some more information and bring you more content in our part 2 of the Bennet sisters coming of age. A reminder that I am not a fashion historian or a reenactor, but just someone who loves fashion and history. These are the resources that the girls and I have been reading through. They have been very, very useful information, though I would say this one right here, you do need to make sure that an adult is reading through it before sharing it with the kids, as there's a lot of deep and some dark stuff in there. Another great resource has been these YouTube channels with their videos: Crow's Eyes Production, Early American. They both do excellent videos on this, as well as Samantha. And there are many others that have helped in this study as well. Thank you so much for watching. We hope to see you in the next video.